is Texas. And Texas, uniquely, is oil. And just as oil powered the Sun Belt's economic miracle in the 70s, so a decade later, the depressed face of the U.S. oil industry can be seen most clearly in Texas. For Texas, the transition from boom to bust is as familiar as the oil patch itself. But with the whole shape of the oil business changing, this latest bust could threaten the existence of Texas's most colorful contribution to the industry, the wildcatter, or independent oil man.
Because of the suddenness of the oil and the very individual way in which oil was controlled and developed, it gave enormous scope for individual entrepreneurs who could then themselves create independent oil companies, which could challenge the big oil majors of the Seven Sisters. And the whole cult of oil in Texas was also part of the cult of the individual, the sense of eccentric, extremely ruthless individuals who could personally control considerable chunks of oil supply. A quite different kind of attitude, quite different sort of tradition from the big international Seven Sisters.
We watched the show from time to time. As a matter of fact, they wanted to film the show out here before it started. We were approached about their filming it here. And of course, you know, I have children, I have a big family. Our home is for our family.
If a family conducted its operations as the Ewings do on TV, that family and that business would very quickly be ostracized from the Dallas business community.
Dallas stands for old money in Texas, so the recent oil bust has hurt Dallas less than Houston, the state's oil capital. But it's no coincidence that the producers chose Dallas for the TV soap opera. For just 300 yards apart on Dallas's Elm Street are the headquarters of two of Texas's most powerful independent oil companies. The two are cutthroat competitors, their business philosophies poles apart. The only thing they have in common is that both are run by sons of the most remarkable wildcatter of the century, Haroldson Lafayette Hunt.
We are just plain folks, your mother and me, just plain folks like our own folks used to be.
A kindly old grandfather pictured on his 80th birthday, surrounded by his family and a doting wife at his Dallas home. Mount Vernon, modeled on George Washington's house of the same name, only bigger. In the early 1970s, H.L. Hunt was regarded as the richest man in America. Mike Wallace of CBS asked him how rich that was.
Give us a horseback guess as to how much H.L. Hunt is worth.
Well, it would be so misleading that no one would believe it, so let's don't.
What do you mean, why misleading?
Well, you see, they talk about that I have an income of $1 million a week.
Yes.
And that is a lot of percent erroneous.
It is erroneous? It's bigger or smaller than that?
Oh, as far as I know, I would starve to death with an income of $1 million a week.
H.L. Hunt was born the son of an Illinois dirt farmer. The young Hunt had a good head for figures, which he first put to use as a riverboat gambler. But then he discovered the biggest gamble of all, the oil business.
H.L. Hunt made the key play in gaining his fortune in 1930 by virtue of the so-called Dad Joyner deal. In this deal, Hunt bought for $1 million cash, or actually $30,000 in cash and about $1.5 million in payments, a oil field that turned out to be worth $100 million. It was the heart of the great East Texas field.
The discovery well of the biggest oil field ever struck in the United States outside Alaska. It was drilled in October 1930 by a veteran wildcatter, Columbus Marion Joyner, Dad Joyner to his friends, on land he'd leased from a farmer's widow, Daisy Bradford, about 100 miles east of Dallas. Here, Dad Joyner is pictured at the discovery well. Also in the picture, wearing the Panama hat, is the man who played no part in finding the oil, but who would become a millionaire from Joyner's discovery. Also pictured is the last survivor from this photograph, driller Jim Maxwell, who knew Joyner well.
He would sell leases and pay the hands about once a month. And if he didn't have it, well, the banker at Dallas would come down and bring us the cash. He wouldn't write a check. He'd bring us the cash. Nobody believed there was oil there because Dad Joyner had drilled several dry holes, not in Texas, but up in Oklahoma, and nobody had drilled one around there. We didn't think there was any down here in this part of East Texas. They undone the pipe there, and the oil just gushed out and went over the derrick, and everybody just screamed. And that old black oil just come down on the derrick, and it was just made you feel plumb funny. That's the first time I'd ever seen any oil come out of an oil well and go over the top of the derrick. And everybody just felt chills running down their back, and everybody was real happy.
But to finance the Daisy Bradford well, Joyner had sold the titles for oil leases several times over. Hardly had he capped the well than more than 100 lawsuits were filed against him. H.L. Hunt offered to bail him out, and a meeting was arranged in the Baker Hotel in Dallas.
Exactly what went on in the hotel room in the Baker Hotel in Dallas is unknown to this day. But after these 2 days of negotiations, Dad Joyner emerged having sold his oil field to H.L. Hunt. About 3 days after that, it was disclosed that another major oil company had offered Joyner 3 times the price, not knowing that Hunt had already bought the field.
If Hunt is seen as the Jock Ewing character in the Dallas TV series, then Dad Joyner was the inspiration for Digger Barnes. Too late, Joyner realized he sold the Daisy Bradford lease for a fraction of its worth. He sued Hunt, claiming he had been cheated.
And H.L. Hunt had given a deposition denying any wrongdoing, and then Joyner gets up just as the suit is about to go to trial and drops his suit. Well, of course, this was a stunning blow in the courtroom that day, and no one knew exactly why, and to this day, they still don't know. Had Hunt paid him off? Had Joyner simply realized that he had been conned? It's hard to say.
Whatever the real truth, Hunt was now the sole owner of the Daisy Bradford lease. Joyner had been outsmarted by a smarter con man. The lease was to become the basis of the biggest personal fortune in 20th century oil history. The Hunt saga is the very stuff of the Texan oil tradition, the gamble of winners and losers, booms and busts. For if the modern oil business is seen as a global poker play, its roots come from the hustlers of Texas and Louisiana, wildcatters like Joyner, and the smarter players who could parlay Texas crude into pure gold. The Daisy Bradford strike was at the heart of a giant oil field. As the boomers hit town, the nearby communities erupted in a flood of oil. But not even a slice of one of the world's biggest oil fields was enough for H.L. Hunt. Soon he was wheeling and dealing all over the South. But Hunt had things other than oil on his mind, even if on the surface he appeared happily married to Lyda Bunker, a former schoolmistress. Hunt's first child was born to Lyda in 1915. The girl was christened Margaret. 2 years later, a son was born, Haroldson Lafayette III, nicknamed Hassie. Then came another daughter, Caroline. But around 1925, Hunt met a young secretary named Frania Tye, and soon he was starting a new family with her, first Howard, then Haroldina. Meanwhile, Lyda was giving birth to Bunker and Herbert. Then Frania gave birth to Helen and Hugh, while Lyda was producing her sixth child, Lamar. But as if all this wasn't complicated enough, Hunt then fell for another young secretary, Ruth Ray. In 1943, she had a son, Ray, and then daughters, Ruth, Helen, and Swanee. For years, none of the children knew of the existence of the others.
And this was, as I mentioned earlier, part of H.L.'s notion that he had a genius gene, that he should propagate the race and do the world a favor by spreading this genius gene. So this was more than just a man having mistresses. It was more than just your typical captain's paradise. It was a man who wanted to not only live with these women and have sex with them, but also to have children with them and have a family.
But the genius gene could also go awry. Hunt's first son, Hassie, began to show symptoms of mental illness. As he became more violent, Hunt arranged for him to have a frontal lobotomy. It was not a success. Hassie survived, but took no further part in the business. Lyda died in 1955, and Hunt married Ruth Ray, chronologically the third woman in his life, and set up home in Dallas with their 4 children. With Hassie out of the picture, H.L.'s other sons from his first marriage, Bunker and Herbert, were seen as the natural inheritors of Hunt Oil. But suddenly the Hunt name was projected into the full public gaze when President Kennedy visited the Republican stronghold of Dallas. Bunker Hunt, a staunch Republican, paid for an ironic newspaper advertisement. The advertisement posed a series of 12 loaded questions to Kennedy, including why did the president allow American soldiers to be killed daily in Vietnam? The advertisement highlighted the campaign of hate that had been building up in Dallas against the young president. The assassination had repercussions for the Hunts.
Of course, that was the worst thing that ever happened, the assassination, and my husband certainly felt so too. And within an hour, we were receiving threats. I could not believe that. My husband had voted for Kennedy. He knew his father. He was a self-made man, and he felt that Kennedy would certainly make a fine president. And how we could receive threats of that nature, I could not understand. But yes, we were asked to leave for a while because of the threats we were receiving. And so we did.
But after decades of staying out of the headlines, H.L. Hunt now seemed to cultivate them. This photograph, first published in Life magazine, presented him as America's richest man. But his lifestyle belied his immense wealth.
He loved taking his lunch with him to the office. I know he was kidded a lot about that, and much was said about him taking his lunch in a little brown bag. He really enjoyed doing it, and his reason for doing it, number one, he felt it was a waste of time sitting over a table at lunchtime to lose an hour, hour and a half, or 2 hours at lunch. Then secondly, of course, he did truly like the health foods. He was very careful about his diet and what he ate.
Professional gamblers of the 30s regarded Hunt as the finest poker player in Texas. In business, and even as an old man playing checkers with his buddies, right through his life, the gamble was all. But Ray Hunt, H.L.'s son by Ruth, who was now being groomed in the family business, recalls a different side to Hunt, the gambler.
Somebody came up to my father, and the individual had had a little bit more to drink than he should have. But he said, "Mr. Hunt, you know, how does it feel to be known as the world's greatest gambler? You've taken all these great risks. You've got a reputation as being a fantastic gambler, very successful. How does that feel?" And my father very quickly dismissed the man, saying, "Well, that's totally false," and he moved on someplace else in the room because he really didn't care for people that had too much to drink. As we left that party, my father and I were walking down the hall, and I turned to him and I said, "Dad, how in the world could you possibly have answered that man saying that you don't consider yourself to be a gambler with all the different things that I know you've done?" And he said, "Ray, I have never taken a risk, but that if everything went against me, I couldn't keep right on going."
Hunt could always figure the odds, but hated anything that upset them, like surprises.
On one occasion, I thought, well, I am just going to have a real happy birthday party for my husband, inviting all of our friends. I had never done this. We always have had family birthday dinners and made a lot over birthdays. But on this occasion, I was going to have a surprise birthday dinner for my husband. Somehow, he happened to see one of the invitations before they were mailed, came to me wanting to know the meaning of all this. So I said, "Oh, Popsy, we were going to have a surprise for you." He said, "You know I don't like surprises."
When Hunt died in 1974, the rivalry between his offspring, which had rumbled under the surface during his lifetime, could no longer be contained. It has continued with disastrous consequences for the family fortune.
The feud between the families of H.L. Hunt after his death is much like the feud on TV between Bobby Ewing and J.R. Ewing. On the one hand, you had the first family, the children of Lyda Bunker Hunt, led by Bunker Hunt and Herbert Hunt, and to a lesser extent by Lamar Hunt, the three brothers. On the other hand, you had the family of Ray Hunt. It was not the fault of Ray Hunt, of course, that his father, H.L. Hunt, had a secret family or any of this other stuff, or a first family for that matter, but he was born and he became the bastard son. So you had the first family resenting these so-called bastard children of H.L. Hunt.
When Frania Tighe, mother of Hunt's middle family, challenged the first and third families for a fair share of the Hunt millions, the feud spilled into the courtrooms. In the final settlement, Hunt Oil was broken up, with young Ray becoming president of the original company and Bunker and Herbert setting up a rival firm, Hunt Energy Corporation, a few hundred yards down the street in Dallas's commercial district.
Obviously, with a similarity of names, we're constantly getting each other's mail and phone calls, and there's a lot of confusion, and there forever will be. But the two companies are entirely separate and independent in terms of ownership, officers. One might as well be Mobil and the other might as well be Exxon. They're entirely separate.
But while Ray Hunt was emerging as the family's acceptable face, Bunker was now seeking to increase his huge fortune outside the oil business.
Exactly what those fellows are doing up in New York and Chicago, but I think they're telling us that there aren't going to be any fat boys in Dallas making any money off of them.
Bunker had been outraged when Colonel Gaddafi nationalized his most lucrative oil field in Libya. Now he moved into other commodities like soybeans, and then by buying racehorses.
These horses are a little like humans. The day when it's like this, they're sort of lazy, you know. I was driving out here. I was a little bit drowsy.
Marge, I left my glasses laying down there on
But the play which blazed the Hunt name across the world's press came when he joined with his brother Herbert in an attempt to corner the silver market.
These are dime store ones here.
Their silver scheme was not just, as many people thought, to try and own all the silver in the world and try and make a profit as speculators, but rather because they thought that paper money was no good, that it wasn't backed by real hard bullion anymore, and that this was the only way that they could stave off what they perceived to be at the time a coming apocalypse.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
The Hunt brothers had inherited their father's gambling streak, but not his instinct for quitting while they were ahead. The price of silver collapsed. The brothers lost millions and ended up before a Senate hearing.
What percentage of the world's known silver did the Hunts control? And I mean all of the Hunts, the corporate Hunts, the cousin Hunts, the brother Hunts, Lamar, who's not here, everybody that could be part of your group. Well, and International Metals and the whole. Do you understand the question? Yes, I understand the question. I object to the word group because we all act as individuals. Oh, come on now. But look. Nelson, Bunker, Hunt, can you tell us what your current debts are from the silver business?
No, I don't have those figures with me, Congressman, and I don't have them in my head.
Can you get it for us?
Yes.
Do you have any notion of how much you're worth, or the Hunts are worth, or anybody?
No, I don't have any idea. A fellow asked me that once, and I said, well, I don't know, but if I did know, people that know how much they're worth generally aren't worth too much.
I can't hear you. What was that?
That's good. I was just using a cliche that people that know how much they're worth generally aren't worth too much.
Well, you're absolutely right there. Most of us are in that category.
256. I need plates, please.
If the Dallas TV theme runs right through the Hunt family, there are also parallels with the descendants of Dad Joyner, who lost out to Hunt. Sandy Joyner Roberts is Dad's great-granddaughter, the closest thing to the Pam Ewing character in the TV series. She runs a modest chicken bar in Dallas. While much of the disappointment has gone for her generation of Joyners, the older members of Dad's family still dwell on what might have been.
I think 50 years ago, there was so much pain. And, you know, no one thought about the living children of Hunt today and resented their having money. It was more the series of the pain that it actually caused our family. I don't really have any bad feelings about the Hunts for inheriting a fortune. Just as I don't want anybody to blame me for maybe feeling a bit cheated.
The great East Texas field produced more millionaires than any other oil field in America. But Dad Joyner died a virtual pauper. He'd made the headlines, Hunt had made the money. But had he cheated Joyner?
Well, I don't know whether H.L. Hunt cheated him out of anything. He paid him for what he got, but I don't know. He might have not paid him quite enough. You know, he'd already proved that there was oil there, and H.L. Hunt might have ought to give him a little bit more for it.
The old famous picture of Dad Joyner, Doc Lloyd, that has a tremendous impact. If Hunt is in the picture especially. You know, I keep thinking, move over, you know, let the man that brought this in have his day. Because, he's not really asking for that much. But I want him out of the picture sometimes. And I think of him as being more of an opportunist for getting in that picture.
H.L. Hunt was the classic independent, self-made, shrewd, but first and foremost, a Texas oil man. His successors among the independents would develop the tradition worldwide and go on to challenge even the Seven Sisters. Malibu, California, home of the John Paul Getty Museum, a treasure trove of rare sculptures, paintings, and antiques. The collection was amassed through the huge wealth of another oil independent, also labeled the richest man in the world, J. Paul Getty. The museum cost $17 million to build, and when Getty died, he left it an endowment now worth $2.2 billion, making it the richest art museum in the world. Unlike H.L. Hunt, Getty was born rich. His father was a lawyer who made a multi-million-dollar fortune from the first Oklahoma oil boom. After making his own first $1 million dealing in oil leases by the age of 24, Getty moved to England to study at Oxford. By the time he was 40, he was able to buy a medium-sized oil company, Tidewater, and found himself challenging the majors. His early oil fields were along the California coastline, towns like Signal Hill, Santa Fe Springs, and Huntington. Getty's Tidewater was an integrated company with wide exploration and production activities in the United States and abroad. Getty tankers bearing the Flying A logo plied the world's sea routes. Getty had his own refineries. And Getty's Flying A gas stations went into competition with the established brands. But his big break came in 1949 when he signed a deal with the Saudis for an oil concession. So Getty had the distinction of being the first independent to challenge the sisters' monopoly in the Middle East. Sutton Place, a Tudor mansion on the outskirts of London, became his business headquarters, a kind of halfway place between his U.S. and Middle East oil interests. But while Getty typified the growing internationalism of the independent, he was also a loner with a morbid fear of flying. Increasingly, his business deals were done from Sutton. He shared with Hunt a real interest in the company of women. His 5 marriages all failed, but he was never short of female companionship.
I've heard it said that he loved money and he loved women in that order. I don't think that's at all a fair description of him. He had many, many interests. He loved travel, he loved art, of course he loved women, and the women loved him. But I think you could say that about most men. And certainly we all love money, there's no doubt about that.
But for all his wealth, he recognized how puny his real strength was as an independent compared to the power of the multinational oil companies.
I remember Getty talking to me about the big oil companies as if he himself was a tiny figure. The fact that he himself commanded vast wealth he thought was irrelevant compared to the giants as he saw them, like Exxon and Shell. And that produced a very curious balance, if you like, of temperament, because you have the independents with their own inferiority complex, in spite of the wealth of the owners, whereas the big companies had their own disadvantage because they lacked the mobility and that ultimate decisiveness of the entrepreneurs at the head of the smaller companies.
You know what they're paying now for Nigerian oil? It's $15 a barrel.
His last major coup came with Arm & Hammer when they struck a billion-barrel oil field in the North Sea.
I'm glad to see you looking well.
The mantle of the last of the heroic oil independents had fallen on Getty's final partner, the remarkable Dr. Armand Hammer, chairman of Occidental Petroleum.
Yeah, I think that's all. We'll be in good shape. I'll just say depending on schedule.
Friend of royalty, confidant of prime ministers, self-appointed ambassador on both sides of the Iron Curtain, Armand Hammer, by a combination of self-promotion and business genius, has become a 20th century legend.
Yeah, we thought you'd want to see that.
I know the truth.
You want to try to work in Oman or something at that time? Or Jordan. How about Jordan? Do you want to ask him to autograph one?
No.
No? Okay.
Okay, thanks.
His office is lined with the portraits of his encounters with the famous and the powerful. If you haven't had your photograph taken with Armand Hammer, you're an international nobody.
Did he get Roman about some anecdote?
Some anecdote, right. Right, and we've done that. We've asked him for that.
Has he got any? Did he come up with it?
Not yet, but we'll get something from him. I think that'll be good. And then we can... Frank is trying to change the...
Hammer's first business patron was none other than Lenin himself.
Personal for them.
Armand Hammer first went to Russia just after the revolution and was appalled at the starvation and disease he found. His Russian-born father had been one of the founders of the Communist Party in the United States.
I tell them all the time, I'm a capitalist, and I think our system is better than yours because it works, and communism doesn't work. Lenin told me that in 1921. He said communism wasn't working then, and that's why he turned to a new economic policy and said to me, why don't you be the first concessionaire? And as you know, he gave me the first concessions. He gave me the export-import concession, the asbestos mining concession.
Lenin also approved the payment of Russian furs and caviar to Hammer in exchange for grain to feed the starving Russians. Hammer arranged to have it shipped from the U.S. to Petrograd. Hammer also played a role in revitalizing Russian agriculture by helping to import Ford tractors from the United States. His reward, further business concessions from the Russians. But when Stalin came to power, Hammer began to prepare his retreat from Moscow. Stalin allowed him to take with him all household effects, which Hammer interpreted as the Russian art treasures he had been collecting. The famous Fabergé eggs were the centerpiece of the collection. When he arrived back in the States, Hammer sold them off, along with $50 million worth of other Russian treasures in New York department stores.
Thank you. I want to say goodbye.
Successful careers then followed in the liquor business after Prohibition and in beef production. But the business world was losing its challenge. Like Getty, Hammer was becoming more interested in his collection of fine art. Finally, in 1956, he decided to quit business and retire to Los Angeles. It was then he hit on a novel scheme for reducing his tax bill when the partners in an ailing oil field approached him.
Well, they said, we have 2 leases that we recently acquired, and and we'd like to drill them. We think there's oil on those leases. And it would take $50,000 to drill each well. So my wife and I loaned them the $50,000 and took a note payment. The understanding was that if we struck oil, we would have a half interest in those 2 leases. And if we didn't, we'd have a bad debt that we could write off. Well, with beginner's luck, both of those wells came in.
Hammer's problem, then and subsequently, was that he found it hard to drill dry holes. At the age of 58, he had found a brand new career as an independent oil man. By the early 80s, after 30 years of success in Libya, the North Sea, and Colombia, Armand Hammer's Occidental Petroleum was big enough to compete with the Seven Sisters themselves. But the Sisters' first real challenge in the United States was to come appropriately from Texas and from a different kind of independent.
That's what happens when you have short legs.
This is the Mesa country of the Texas Panhandle, land more suited to raising cattle than drilling for oil. But while there's something of the cowboy and the mentality of the independent, there's nothing country boy about T. Boone Pickens, head of Mesa Limited and corporate raider extraordinaire.
Well, you know, you're talking about my image and how I look. It's always interesting to me to pick up a paper and see. And I saw two or three writers in there said he had on a gray suit and a blue shirt and a red tie and black shoes or something like that. I thought, my gosh, when did my attire get so interesting that reporters started putting down? And it dawned on me that they did expect me to walk into that meeting, I guess, in a pair of chaps and cowboy boots and a big hat on, probably, and shoot holes in the ceiling.
But though his business attire is pure Ivy League, Pickens came from the Texas cowpuncher tradition, and Big Oil saw him as the classic oil field raider. From his company's headquarters in Amarillo, Pickens, a former geologist and oil lease salesman, became the most feared takeover specialist in American big business, expanding his interests beyond the oil industry.
Okay. All right, and then we've got the directors meeting on the 21st. That starts at 4 o'clock, is that right?
That's correct.
And that will start here, or will it start at the Amarillo Club?
Amarillo Club.
As a result of his attempted takeovers, Pickens has made millions for his Mesa shareholders and for himself.
I'm hoping that there's going to be a pickup there Thursday.
I'm not sitting here telling you I'm a pauper, because I'm not, because the board of directors recognizes the money that was made in certain deals that we've had, and we're able to participate with bonuses in those deals. But you don't see us getting bonuses when we have down operating results. The only time we get bonuses at Mesa is when we have made a big financial success for the stockholders.
Pickens first made his name in a bid for City Service, an Oklahoma oil company, in 1982. Although unsuccessful, his raid boosted the shares, and Mesa made a profit of $30 million. Pickens' next target was the mighty Gulf Oil, one of the Seven Sisters. Gulf's president, James Lee, revealed how little he knew about his own company's activities in a Senate hearing.
I'm sorry, I lost you. How many of the 27,000 employed by Gulf in the United States are employed in Pennsylvania? I won't ask you for any other state.
I'll have to get you that number. I'm sorry. I should have had it, and I don't have it.
Lee owned 21,000 shares in Gulf Oil, and he'd been there 42 years. So, he was making a salary of $1 million a year and a bonus of about that much. So, you've got a situation here that is absolutely classic to what I'm talking about.
The fifth witness on the list, Mr. T. Boone Pickens, President and Chairman of the Board of Mesa Petroleum Company.
When Pickens was summoned to the witness stand, he revealed that he knew more about Gulf than its president. He also showed that it would take sharper minds than the Senate investigators to outthink or outtalk T. Boone Pickens.
None of these transactions resulted in Mesa gaining control of its target and implementing a royalty trust or any of the other restructuring devices Mr. Pickens has championed. And the biggest winners in his raids are often speculators, not the small shareholder he professes to hold so dear. Is that right?
No, it's not right.
Now, as a matter of fact, if the deal goes through here at $80, and I understand that at least the story's going around that somebody called you up on the telephone and said SoCal has just offered $80, and you said, shucks, lost another one. Is that right?
That's not right.
Well,
that was in Business Week, and I've never used shucks in my life.
But many remained unconvinced that Pickens was really trying to take over a major oil company.
We're trying very hard to take one over, but can you point out to me that anybody that has been hurt in one of these deals? There's not anybody that has been damaged. There's only been profit made, profit that would not have been made, and that's being better understood all the time as to how much profit is here and what a poor job the managements of these companies have done for the stockholders.
Instead of going to Pickens, Gulf was absorbed by Chevron in the biggest corporate merger in U.S. history. But Mesa's profit on the sale of its Gulf stock was $760 million. Later, Pickens failed in bids for Phillips and Union Oil. So does he see himself as a loser?
Gosh, I can't imagine what it'd be like to lose. I sure don't like that feeling. It's a feeling that I don't know. I've had losses. I know how to take losses. We drill a lot of dry holes, and I know when to plug one.
A former high school basketball star, Pickens regularly heads the racquetball league in the gymnasium he has built for employees.
I'm an only child, and I grew up with my mother, grandmother, and aunt, and they took a great interest in me as being an only child. And I just hated to lose as a child. My mother said, son, you don't need to be gentlemanly when you lose, but you don't want to throw a fit either. She said, you don't need to stand around and visit with somebody and tell them how good they played. She said, you can just shake hands with them and leave if you can just develop that. And still today, when I lose on a racquetball court, I'm polite, but that's all.
Pickens believes that healthy employees make for healthy companies. The restructuring his attempted takeovers set in motion in the early 80s has now swept through the U.S. oil business. Many of the larger companies with integrated exploration, production, and refining have been forced to slim down, shed employees, and become more competitive. But not everyone agrees that the restructuring he sparked off has been healthy for the oil industry.
You see, if you contrast somebody like Boone Pickens now with people like Getty and Hammer in that heroic age, as I see it, Pickens is really operating within an existing oil structure and beginning to dismantle it or exploit it or to move and break it up in a very different way from Getty and Hammer, who were creating a whole new oil structure themselves, who were going out, finding the oil, taking huge gambles, and then building companies round that. Pickens, I would say, is essentially a much more negative kind of operation, though with his own financial brilliance at the same time.
What he is doing, he is curtailing exploration. And when you curtail exploration, you cause this country to depend more and more, whether it's today, or whether it's tomorrow, or whether it's next year, or 2 years, or 3 years from now, to import more oil because we are not exploring for oil as we should in this country. We have the potential, a great potential is left. He doesn't believe that there's a potential left in this country. I disagree with him.
He says you have to drill wells. He says there ought to be 4,000 rigs running in the United States today, and there are barely 2,000. So you can see what the rest of the industry thinks of Mike Halbooty. They think he doesn't know what he's talking about. He isn't. We're running more rigs today than Mike Halbooty is. He's never run as many rigs as we have here at Mesa Petroleum. He doesn't have the kind of record we have for building a company. He doesn't employ as many people as we do. He doesn't run as big budgets as we do, even when we're cut back at the present time. So for Halbooty to have so much to say, I would say that, you know, that he basically doesn't know what he's talking about.
So while a question mark still hangs over Pickens' real intentions to run a major oil company or add to his millions, the restructuring process he began has gained momentum in the current oil glut. The remaining 6 sisters can only wait apprehensively for his next move or someone emulating him.
460 legs, that'd be 150.
If you don't agree that you have to have long-term planning in an industry which has massive capital expenditures and which take 5 to 8 years to bring to fruition, if you don't agree that you don't have to have that, and if you do agree that you can leverage a company right up to the hilt with borrowed money, then you ought to embrace Mr. T. Boone Pickens and tell him he's the world's greatest. But I tell you that if this company and this industry is going to do the job it has to do, and the job that the public expects us to do, which is to supply them with continuing amounts of petroleum products which they use, you've got to do long-range planning, and you've got to be very careful about the amount of debt that you put on your company.
I think Pickens represents something much bigger than himself, of course. He represents a much more ruthless attitude within the market itself. It represents a much greedier kind of shareholder, a more vulnerable management, and an extremely tough determination to exploit assets immediately. Jam today, not jam tomorrow. I think that is certainly a revolution in the oil business, even perhaps in capitalism itself. But I think it does contain dangers, because nobody really is out there taking the kind of risks in terms of exploration, which in the end the oil business is going to depend on for its long-term security.
And the restructuring trend is still not over. Getty Oil has been swallowed up by Texaco, who in turn is involved in the biggest lawsuit in U.S. business history with Pennzoil, who had also tried to take over Getty. So how safe are the remaining sisters?
We've already been through a phase where the smaller companies with a wide gap, the Marathon, Conoco, City Service, Getty, Gulf, Phillips, and Unocal, those companies have all been restructured. Now we're looking at Exxon, Atlantic Bridgefield, Standard of Indiana, Standard of Ohio, British Petroleum, Mobil, Texaco, Chevron. It's hard to say which one might be more vulnerable, and Exxon less vulnerable because they are much bigger, and Royal Dutch and BP are headquartered overseas where there isn't as much shareholder consciousness. So the remaining U.S. companies, Texaco, Chevron, Arco, Standard of Indiana, are probably more vulnerable.
The restructuring trend and the oil glut of the mid-'80s combined to plunge Texas into its worst recession in 50 years. The offshore drilling rigs piled up unused in the Gulf of Mexico. Texas has known boom and bust in the past, but this time it may be different, for Texas is no longer in control. The state that boasts a tradition of rugged independence is now another captive of global oil politics. In a world with a surplus of oil, the future for Texas and its heritage of the independent oil man has never been less certain.
Tomorrow at 8, watch NOVA and see how geologists, some of them local, are developing new techniques to predict when and how big volcanoes will erupt. Then stay with us at 9 for the Ring of Truth and more geology as scientists search for clues to the past that could answer questions about the birth and life of our planet. That's NOVA at 8, Ring of Truth at 9, tomorrow, here on Channel 2. 10 o'clock news coming up. Stay tuned.